Good afternoon, everyone. We are here to
Yeah.
we are here to present on Wildland Urban
One
Interface.
second here, though. Just introduce yourself first, and then we'll have announcements, and then we'll get into the presentation.
Okay. I'm Rohina Surendran, and I'm a landscape architect. I practice around the Bay Area, mostly focusing on residential projects and some commercial. And I met Peter at the last Christmas AI luncheon. And you can.
Yeah. Peter Wolf, landscape architect, practicing for quite some time. We're actually doing work throughout the state and have currently 2 projects that were in the wildfire urban interface areas. And most of my projects now are multifamily supportive of affordable housing projects. And then, so what we want to do is see if there's we got a small group here. Any announcements from the group? Donald?
Yes, I'm Donald Wardlaw, and a couple announcements about the Small Firm Forum. The next month program in September will be a tour of the Berkeley City Club by Julia Morgan. There'll be a fee for that. The tour guide charges to do it, so there'll be more details on that. We've done that in the past before, and it's always very interesting to see that building and its details. And the second thing, Small Firm Forum this year did a roundtable. In the old days, we did many roundtables. That was most the way we did things. Roundtables based upon the idea of sharing what you know and learning from other people about a particular topic. So the point I want to make is that if any of you have an interesting thing that you'd like to have a roundtable on, what you'd like to learn from other people in this group, let me know or put it in the chat window, and we'll take that into account when we're planning meetings for next year. Thank you very much.
Any other announcements, either from the room here or remotely? Not, then we'll move forward with the presentation.
You want to start?
No, you go ahead.
Okay. So today we're going to talk about Wildland Urban Interface, or WUI as it's called, and what makes it critical. So as many of you know, we are going through a lot of wildfires in the past few years. And when we started looking into it, we found a lot of interesting information that architects and landscape architects could use as takeaways and be more careful in future projects. So wildfire risk in Northern California has become a lot more prevalent because of over a century of faulty forest management practices. So we didn't practice preventative or prescribed burning. So there are significant fuel loads, and the forests have become more dangerous. And added to that is a warming planet because of climate change. The 19 of the 20 worst fires have happened since 2000. So that tells you that wildfires are becoming more dangerous. And in addition to that, more structures are going into the fire country. So we're building further out, and that makes it more risky for the new buildings. 60% of all new homes are built in fire country. So we are building in the interface between the forest land and urban areas.
So this is a map from the Cal Fire. It shows 3 general areas, what we call intermix, interface, and influence areas. And the designation is kind of, I'm not sure if you can see it very clearly on this, but you can see that the green area is where a forested area or grassland area is within 1.5 miles of a what's called a interface or intermix area. And the intermix and interface areas are really where settlements occur that are at different densities. The intermix area is predominantly one unit of housing to I believe it's to 10 units of housing on a 20 up to 25 acres or something like that. Interface is more dense, and also intermix also occur within a wildland area, whereas the interface doesn't necessarily occur within a wildland area, but it could be influenced by that, as well as its higher density. And then the influence area, as I mentioned, it's in areas that potential wildfires could occur within 1.5 miles of those habited locations. And so you can see that we're talking about a large part of the state. There you go. This is another map from CAL FIRE showing what's referred to as SRA areas, state responsibility areas, which are basically locations that are fire prevention is provided by the state or financed by the state, versus local responsibility areas. And so that's how the code is kind of divided up. So the next thing is that, and this actually is kind of generally within our hour or so radius of Oakland here. You see the fine red areas is a very high risk fire zones, which is basically the Berkeley, Oakland Hills area, nearby, and some of the hill areas in San Mateo County and Marin County, et cetera. And then the pink areas are very high areas, fire risk areas, high fire and moderate. High fire is orange, and then moderate is yellow. And those are all state responsibility areas. So one of the things when we start to approach a project is you really need to determine very early on, is the project in a fire zone area, and who is the jurisdiction? Because the code says one thing, but each municipality or each jurisdiction can have even more stringent requirements, and they vary tremendously. So as I mentioned, there's state responsibility areas, which most of us aren't really, I don't believe, are involved in. But there's also the local responsibility areas. And local responsibility areas can mean the city, can mean the county, can mean the city and county, or can mean a district, a fire district, or a responsibility district. And typically what we're talking about in terms of wildfire urban interface areas that need to be addressed in the design are areas that are indicated as very high and high risk of fire damage or danger. And this is a closer, I believe this is a even closer look at that same map, where you can see that very high is in red, again, in parts of Alameda and Contra Costa County, as well as San Mateo and in Marin County. Although if you look into Napa County, a huge portion of Napa County had burned a couple of years ago. So these models are being generated, but they need to be updated.
So as designers, as architects and landscape architects, what we can do is stay completely informed of what the current, codes are. And we have to prepare the owner early on in the project, because sometimes the fire approval takes more than 6 months. I had one project where the fire department took more than 3 months to approve the driveway, the Knox box, and that kind of stalled the owners moving into their home. So the timelines for approval are quite important.
And then there's areas where you may need to have some tree removal occur. And in some jurisdictions, like the city of Oakland, there are restrictions in terms of when you can remove trees, if they're inhabited by birds or bats. And then that restricts your time zone or time frame that you can actually remove that vegetation. And at the same time, you need to have a qualified bird or bat biologist come in to verify that those habitats exist. So it becomes increasingly problematic in that regard. And then that could obviously impact the timeline for the project.
When it comes to codes, the fire departments refer to Chapter 7A, which looks at materials used and construction methods. So Chapter 7A is what they ask you to refer to for landscape architects when you build a deck. They make sure that you add a note that, you know, all the decking material conforms to this chapter. And also if you have, which we'll cover later, but if you have fire pits and fireplaces, they have to have certification, ASTM certification or UL certification. Chapter 49 looks at what are the additional requirements for wildland urban interfaces. So when the jurisdiction, either the city or the enforcing agency requires landscape plans, we have to provide a landscape plan. Some of them call it a vegetation management plan. So we have to get into the zones and we'll talk about that.
Oh, 1 second before we move forward. So there's really two areas. One is the idea of what's called hardening the building, making materials selecting materials that are fire resistant. And the other is and that's mostly with respect to Chapter 7A. The other, Chapter 49, is really dealing more with reducing the amount of fuel in the zone of within the perimeter of the structure to reduce the risk of fire spread. So there's the role of the architect, designer, landscape architect, but a lot of this also is really the role of the owner, because as a designer, you can only do so much. And then in this condition, maintenance is a huge need and requirement. And so that really falls on the owner to continually maintain the property throughout the year. But for fire, et cetera, fire departments require an address clearly marked because fires spread very quickly. If the fire department can find the property and get to the property, say if in a rural environment, your trees or whatever is covering the access to the property, that hinders fire, the ability to fight that fire quickly. And fires can spread extremely fast. There's a record of San Diego fire that in 1 hour, it consumed over 5,000 acres of land. I mean, they can move very quickly and create their own climate as well. So some of the other addresses, some things can be addressed, I think, on the owner behalf, not necessarily involving the designer, creating a more defensible space in terms of maintaining that property. We'll talk about that a little later. Hardening the home, there's some cost-effective ways to reduce the impact of sparks and cinders creating fires on the home, because the embers are the biggest impact of creating fires for properties. And then the other issue in terms of home ownership or owners is being prepared, having an ability to, or a plan to vacate, to plan these things out in advance. And lastly, I believe as of 2021, if you have property within a very high wildfire area, state of California requires you to have, provide documentation of a defensible space inspection prior to the sale of that property. Okay, that's a state code now.
What does that entail, Peter?
That's a good question. You have to check with the fire department and they'll be able to guide you through that. There's a checklist that they'll have and they'll go through that. And a lot of those items are probably covered under some of our topic today.
But is it a narrative thing or does it actually require graphic documentation?
It requires a physical inspection, I believe, and documentation. Yeah. So now this is again, I believe this image is from Cal Fire about hardening the home. And what that means is basically to make it more resistant or resilient to fire damage. In this on the right hand side, you see there's a little thermostat scale of priority. The red areas are what areas that have been impacted by fire, by embers, particularly landing on the roof, in the gutters, along chimneys or along skylights. So there's a necessity of having these areas cleaned. Again, that falls onto the owner's responsibility. Attached fences. There's a great video in Marin about embers falling on a fence, and we're trying to reduce the ability of fire to spread. And wooden fences are horrible for this because you have these components that come up and an ember can fall on it and then the fire spreads by the fence line. And so there is a code requirement for minimum, you cannot have a wooden fence attached to the structure in a WUI area. It could be metal or some other non-combustible material. And there are products that are out there that are like fully metal fences that are intended to use in these types of environments. And then vegetation against the building is a risk factor. Decks, windows and vents that may have vent to the outside, like the attic, the embers can get in there and then cause fire. Or having open eaves is another issue because a flame can get up to the structure and then spread further. So the siding, when redoing the siding, etc., that becomes an issue in terms of having fire resistant siding.
Peter,
Yeah,
I've done some places in these zones, and a long time ago I read that during the Oakland fire, which spread to so many homes,
right.
a lot of times the fire actually ignited the insides of homes through windows, not necessarily open windows, but radiant heat, and also by the heat shattering the glass. And if you go to Chapter 7A, I believe it says specifically that windows have to be tempered.
Yeah.
And I don't know why that is a benefit, but this is pretty typical that you've got to have windows that resist the intrusion of fire.
Yeah, I saw that somewhere, and I'm glad, and anybody has something to add to the conversation, please do. About double pane glass, because the single pane will apparently transmit that heat that much faster as well, I believe. But yeah, thanks for that addition.
And some of the manufacturers, like Marvin, for example, they actually have a glass, they offer a bunch of different glass types. They actually have one they call fire glass, which is basically designed to meet that requirement.
Great. And so Cal Fire is a great place to look. There's a tremendous amount of resource material there. Very, very helpful. We've done projects where the architect had promoted some materials or trying to get it through, and we finally realized that, well, it's not on the fire list here, or a pre-approved fire list. But the trouble is that a lot of the different jurisdictions also will have their own stipulations, like no
Open eaves.
no what?
Open eaves.
Oh, no open eaves. No, I'm thinking of petroleum-based products.
Okay.
And if you look at some of the composite lumber, it's it's a petroleum-based product. So there's some issues like that that kind of, it's like the rest of the code. It's not fully, set in stone. There is a lot of, gooiness to it, I guess you could say. But do take a look at their, the state fire marshals through the Cal Fire, their urban interface products handbook, because they have a long list of reviewed products that are supposedly suitable for these types of environments. Okay. And then the other list that the Cal Fire has, which would be very helpful for architects and homeowners, is their Cal Fire's low-cost retrofit list. And these are some things that can be done very cost effectively, like cleaning out the gutters and putting a screen over the gutters so the embers don't fall into the gutter and start a fire from that. Or having screens over vents, or having shutters on windows that don't allow embers to fall on a windowsill or something like that. A lot of very basic, simple things that are very cost effective to do to improve the resiliency of a property.
When it comes to hardscaping around the house, one of the requirements was to use only stone and concrete in the paving, not to use any flammable products. So use pebbles or stone or concrete, and incorporate ember resistant features like the vents and the eaves should be ember resistant, and regularly inspect them. So whenever there's a maintenance inspection, make sure that around the house, within the first 5 feet, all the materials are fire-proofed. For decking, because landscape architects deal with decks that are connected to the house, there is one requirement for it to have a metal flashing at the house. And some of the homes that I've worked on, but they have decks, the planner sends us like a checklist, and you have to make sure that it's built out of fire-resistant material or fire-resistant wood. And that, it keeps coming up. It had to be signed off twice, so it's quite important. Defensible spaces are categorized as zone 1, zone 0, zone 1, and zone 2. So zone 0 is 0 to 5 feet from the house. And that's the zone where you have to not use fire-prone materials, use very little landscaping, not too much of foundation planting, keep it sparse and keep it clean, and make sure that it's inspected and maintained. From 5 to 30 feet, you can have landscaping and trees, but there are spacing requirements. And that's also something the fire department typically signs off on, because the 5 to 30 feet is quite critical when it comes to existing trees that are fire prone, as well as proposed trees that could be fire prone. And beyond the 30 feet, from 30 to 100 feet is also considered defensible space. So up to 100 feet or up to the property line, whichever is closer, the owner is responsible for maintaining it.
And that first 5 feet is really critical, because you're very close proximity to the house or the structure. And so the vegetation you'll see in different jurisdictions it's limited in height, or the type may be only 3 inches high maximum vegetation, or X number of square feet, or things like that. And I found that this hardscape materials like stone, like pebbles and things like that are probably one of the better ways to go. Cal Fire has a great video of this, where they put a little shed and they have this 5-foot zone around it. You can again go to Cal Fire site, and they have one that has vegetation right around the structure, and they light the outside perimeter on fire. And then you see how quickly the one with the vegetation right up to that structure burns. Whereas the other one with this 5-foot zone around it in pebbles or whatever is still standing. And it's very effective. So I would suggest, yeah, sharing it with others. Part of the idea of this idea of defensible space is to create this kind of a vegetation mosaic where you reduce the risk of fire spread by separating the fuel source, by separating the vegetation. So in some jurisdictions, they'll say, oh, you can only have 200 square feet of vegetation in one area, and then you have to have X number of feet to the next group. And that vegetation can only be like 2 feet high. I mean, there's a lot of stipulations in terms of this idea of creating this mosaic to basically reduce the risk of fire spread. Particularly on slopes, because the ability of fire to spread up a slope is critical. And so as landscape architects and designers, there's limitations on the height of vegetation and then how far apart it is in terms of the nature of that slope. If it's no slope, it's 0 to 20%, then it's 2 times the height of the vegetation. And maybe only 10 feet apart of the trees. And again, actually, we don't mention it in this slide presentation, but part of the code is that you don't want, basically the code says no new trees within 10 feet of a flue, a fireplace flue, or a window, or a roof line, right? But really, if you look at it closely, it's really talking about new trees, not ones that are pre-existing. So, but if you look at local jurisdictions, they'll say, if it's pre-existing, 10-foot clearance away from any structure. So this is an issue if you get into steeper land, that this vegetation goes further and further apart. So the aesthetics, we still have to wrestle with this aesthetics. Yeah, I mean, we're gonna go back to the Zen gardens.
Yeah, when it comes to the steepness of the slope on a flat surface, fire flames can be like 6 feet, but if it's steep, it can go up to 24 feet. So that's why we have to space them further apart.
Also, the examples that you've been showing, the diagrams have been like sort of isolated houses, like houses in the country. But sometimes these areas, like I did a project in Larkspur, it's a neighborhood, but it's considered a wildfire area because in the surrounding hills and things like that, it's considered very combustible. And the concern is embers flying through the air, which can sometimes fly a mile. But so you get, you might have this 5-foot requirement or something like that. But, in a regular neighborhood, people like to put plants up next to their house for aesthetic satisfying reasons. And so as landscape architects, I mean, are there like no plants, or most plants are no good, or most plants are good?
Yes.
We'll get to that, but it gets really tricky because the way the code is written, it says, or like a landscape architect can say what's fire resistant, which is not, etc. No, I don't think many landscape architects will put their license on the line saying this is a fire resistant plant, because any plant will catch fire. And so from one jurisdiction to the next, you can literally have some jurisdiction will say this is fireproof or fire resistant, and another jurisdiction will say no, that's not. And in fact, I was doing a project in Southern California, and the municipality was saying they had two things. They had a recent streetscape master plan that was done that had an entire list of vegetation that was supposedly, quote, fire resistant, right? And then the county, which is the jurisdiction for that entire area, had a list that said, no, these are not fire resistant plants. And then the other issue with this, in terms of, because with the, you have to go through planning, right? And planning has, aesthetic restrictions, like, oh, you need to buffer the parking area, or you need to hide your vehicles or your backflow prevention devices and all this sort of stuff. Well, it doesn't work in a WUI area because you've got to have these plants so far apart, you know? It makes, so those are issues that we just have to confront.
So this is for, when it comes to heights, there's a minimum clearance. For trees, there should be a minimum 6-foot clearance from other trees or shrubs, because shrubs can form a fire ladder. So you have, depending on the height of the shrub, 3 times the height of the shrub should be the distance between the shrub and the tree, so that the shrub doesn't form a fire ladder. For plant selection, like Peter was saying, there are different counties and different fire departments. They have their own individual list of fire resistant plants. So you have to go through that list. And sometimes it can be that because we are so used to designing plants for drought tolerance, we select plants that are drought tolerant and that meet the below requirements. But then the fire department reviews it and they X out certain plants which are fire prone, because some of the plants that are drought resistant can be fire prone. So you have to be careful to choose plants that are both drought resistant as well as fireproof. And avoid highly flammable plants such as juniper and pine. Even if there's existing pine trees in Hillsborough, they actually require to be cut down, even if they are protected trees. If it's too close to the house within 10 feet, they require the trees to be removed. And maintain a safe canopy when you plant trees, which can be difficult because if you're planting like a grouping of trees, you still have to have that safe canopy distance. So it could be like the landscape could be a little bit more sparse. Mulch should also be fire resistant. So there's a type of mulch which is called gorilla fir, which is very flammable. So don't use that, as well as ground covers should be fire resistant.
And then sometimes, as I mentioned earlier, that it's this idea, this matrix, that you have mulch, which is basically shredded wood or shredded bark or some type of organic material like that, is entirely flammable, right? And so the intent in some jurisdictions is to kind of limit that to little islands and then have some type of non-flammable material in between those islands so that it doesn't, like a fire starts and then it to reduce the ability for it to spread.
What about eucalyptus trees?
They are very flammable, but certain cities like San Bruno, they have along the main streets, like on Sneak Lane, they have these stands of eucalyptus trees that are considered heritage trees because of their historic significance. But when a homeowner works on a property that's next to those trees are still considered protected. But then the fire department will require those minimum distances. So sometimes there are conflicting, requirements of heritage trees which are protected, because Burlingame also considers eucalyptus a historically heritage tree. So it's difficult to get them removed unless the owner says that it's a fire risk. And it's not on the main street where the public can see the trees, because it creates a screen from the property.
There's one fire that's going on now up north of Chico. It's huge. And there have been loss of structures. I heard 130 or something like that. And it's near a sort of a town called Paradise, which was devastated by a fire a few years ago. What I'm curious about is whether or not in these areas, there are properties that are following these guidelines, and what is the effect when the fire gets near them? Do they burn down just like everybody else?
I don't. I think that the veracity of some of these fires are such now that you do the best you can, and it can overwhelm. I think it can overwhelm. In fact, one of the things that Cal Fire speaks of is that, well, this is the tools that we have at this moment in time, and unfortunately, your insurance company may not reinsure you, even though you've done everything.
And that's happening a lot.
That's happening a lot, yeah, yeah, so they may be even more stringent.
So plant lists, there's a list of plants that Marin County has on their website. You can take a look at that, and typically it's better to use native plants because they have deeper root systems and they're also better adapted to local conditions. They're not as, in general, they're not as flammable, but always make sure that it meets the fire department's list of trees. So when you look at Marin County's list, it's different from the Central Fire District, so that there's not much overlap. So always make sure that you follow those.
So actually, I was looking through the different jurisdictions in the Bay Area, and I think I looked at either El Cerrito or San Leandro, maybe it was El Cerrito. They refer to some Diablo something organization, and they had gone through and reviewed like 51 texts of for fire resistant plants. And so they had reviewed 51 different manuscripts and put together a list of plants that met at least were cited in at least 3 of these. So that might be an opportunity to look through there just for purpose of your education.
Maintenance and upkeep, this is again for planting. Make sure there's no debris and vegetation, especially close to the vents, that there are no leaves. And actually, while I was preparing this, I checked around my house and the vents were filled with leaf. So that's something I have to clean up. Maintain the defensible space and create fire breaks. So even fencing, fencing can come up to the house, but create a fire break. So there's not much, dry leaves and.
Well, that could be non-flammable fence up to the house, within 5 feet of the house. It wouldn't have to be
Metal, yeah.
yeah.
Inspect and repair structures and hardscapes. So if there's any place where you feel that could become fire prone because of planting or other reasons, make sure you repair them.
And then so we kind of looked at just different, and anybody can add to this in terms of Oakland. The Hills has annual wildfire district inspections. Although we've gone up hiking in the hills and wonder, we're concerned. And Berkeley has a defensible space inspection requirement. So a lot of Napa actually has a list for if you're working in that area, a conformance checklist, although it's not entirely. There may be other things beyond that list that you need to comply with. But in most cases of existing properties or new properties, they will need to be, if they're in a WUI zone, they will need to be some type of maintenance inspection almost on an annual basis, at least to monitor the growth of weeds, et cetera, that could create a fire hazard.
Sonoma County they also have the requirement of their own codes. They did have a moratorium on removing oak trees because oak trees are very resistant to fires. So till May 31st of this year, if there was a stand of oak trees on your property, you couldn't get it removed. But from now on, I think they're inspecting it. And they're also looking into rebates or incentivizing residents from improving their homes and making them more fire resistant, providing $10,000. And that's something that they got through FEMA. So FEMA's, at the federal level, they're providing properties within WUIs money to make sure that they're more fire resistant. So this was a project in Marin County that required a vegetation management plan. So the fire department inspected and made sure that they signed off on it. The vegetation management plan called for anything within 30 feet. You see the dash line, that's within 30 feet. of the house had to be, any fire-prone plant had to be removed. And all proposed plants had to be resistant to fire. And also they had requirements for maintenance equipment, such as mowers. Mowers can, create sparks, and those sparks can be quite dangerous if there's dry vegetation. And also trimming of trees and other vegetation within 10 feet of roadways for defensible space. Marin County is one of the more, they have a fire department as well as a fire awareness department. So they create educational outreach programs, and that helps a lot. San Mateo County has, for fireplaces and fire pits, they have the department asks for UL certified products. And a lot of products that are out on the market, like Amazon, homeowners purchase, they don't actually verify if it's UL certified. So when designers and architects and even landscape architects, when we specify this, you have to make sure that it's UL certified, because a lot of the products that are in the market are not UL certified. They can actually be adapted to UL certified igniters. So that's what we do when we specify a certain fireplace or fire pit. The igniter has to be UL certified. So that has to be an additional specification. So for fire prevention, you use fire-resistant plants and materials and incorporate defensible space, and ember resistance is very important, and implementing regular maintenance. So in conclusion, as architects and landscape architects, our designs have to help homeowners and residents. And in order to do that, we have to collaborate with our clients and make sure they're aware of local requirements, and also talk to the fire department early in the process, so you're aware of any additional requirements that they may have. So there's a book by Douglas Kent called Firescaping. That's an excellent resource. He talks about location being critical, because homes that are in the canyon or on the hilltop, on the ridge, are especially more prone to fires because of the wind conditions, because wind carries fires onto the ridge, which I did not know till I read the book. And also what makes homes on ridges more difficult is the access, because their driveways are very steep, and fire trucks, it's difficult to maneuver those driveways. So the fire department will actually inspect it, but I've seen homes where the driveway is steep and they have sharp turns. So having the address at the base of the hill, that becomes more important. And also we looked at county websites and CAL FIRE. CAL FIRE is a very good resource for information.
And wildfire home retrofit guide. It's actually about the Tahoe area, which is quite interesting. Some of these have really great graphics, but some of them are, and even looking at them in terms of the code requirements, things like that, you still have to look at several to get an idea, because I think there's some misleading graphics. I'm not citing this one in particular, but there are some misguidance in terms of graphics and some county websites definitely. But again, I think the first thing to do is really look at the CAL FIRE map that you can actually put in your address and find out what's the fire jurisdiction. Because as we said before, it could be the city, could be the county, could be a district. So you want to make sure who's the fire jurisdiction that you have to find information from. Again, CAL FIRE is a great resource. County websites, local nurseries and landscape professionals can help you at least with some of the plant materials. And in general, this is just kind of guidelines, a lot of other information out there, but we hope this is informative and encourage us all to share information, because it's an ongoing process.
There's also a book that Peter suggested, and I've read half of it, called Ignition.
Yeah.
And it's a great book for designers.
Yeah.
It talks about fire, the history of fire, the cultural significance of
Yeah.
fire suppression, internationally as well as
Yeah.
in the US. But it's written by a journalist and she follows different fires and also looks at prescribed burns. So that's the book that I got, totally into
Yeah.
looking
And
at.
it makes John Muir look like a real,
Easy
not
to-
very good. We can go into that offline.
Yeah.
I want to keep as many friends as I have.
Peter, you've been a landscape architect for many years. I've known you for many
few,
years.
yeah.
AI and all that stuff. So when you go back to earlier in your career,
Yeah,
was this like something people didn't talk about and worry about? Or is this, what's the trajectory of the regulation on all of this?
I think, well, in terms of regulation, I think the Oakland fire really catapulted things because there was a lot of property damage in that. And then subsequently later, there were, San Diego fires and they just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And so, and then the property damage, the values there, I think that's what started catapulting the legislation. I mean, it's been out there for a while. And then the EPA as well has been influential in requiring, wildfire mitigation measures in different locations. But part of this whole issue about for over 100 years, we all kind of grew up with Smokey the Bear, right? Putting out the fire, I can't remember the term for it, but also, and I will throw this out because it was in the book that Rahina just cited, that John Muir hated to see the Native Americans put out fires in Yosemite. He said that was unheard of, but basically they started fires in Yosemite, controlled burns. And it's part of kind of the indigenous culture of the West to do these controlled burns. And John Muir at the time had relations with somebody that's a fellow on the East Coast who I can't remember now. I shouldn't go there. No. But anyways, it was this whole issue about, it was a racist issue that, the white man has knowledge and these are indigenous people and they are inferior to us. And therefore, why are they burning this property? And we had, the white man had this idea, in terms of capitalism, and the forest is an asset that we need to preserve, to protect, so we can cut it down and use it for lumber, things like that. And so for 100 years, that was the idea. Let's protect the forest. Let's not let it burn. Let's not go in there and set fires. In fact, Native American populations were arrested for setting fires, which they had done for centuries. They were to create habitat for deer, wildlife, etc.
So they're sort of were effective in maintaining.
Yeah, and now UC Davis, there's I was just hearing this on the radio the other day. UC Davis, a professor there, there's a billboard that has this new I think it's like a bobcat or something that says, it's a billboard outside of Sacramento that says something to the fact that fires are controlled fires are good or something to that effect. But it's this idea to trying to change the mindset, because even with the fires that were down in the Sequoia Kings Canyon, all the focus was on what is it? The General Sullivan or the big redwood tree that's down there? I can't remember the name of it.
Sherman.
Yeah, General Sherman. And so the media was all about, oh, the General Sherman, it's the fire is burning around there, blah, blah, blah. But there was a research project that was a controlled burn project that was in the park there that they had very, very little damage to, and no media attention was given to that. It was all about, oh, the General Sherman, all the land around the General Sherman is burning, blah, 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 blah. So the mindset has to change.
That's partly due to the fact, correct me or advise me, that redwood trees are relatively fire resistant.
They are to a point.
To a point, yeah. They're not considered fire prone trees.
They are, I mean, historically, now 9 out of 10 fires are human set. It's crazy, but in millennia, I mean, there's what is it? There's trees that are, and now I can't remember the name of the trees, but basically they're about 5,000 years old. They have burn rings on them. They've shown where, about every 20 years, there's a lightning strike and there's a fire. And that's kind of the normal sequence. Well, we've gotten way out of that. We have too much fuel. People are going around with weed whackers or weed cutters at the wrong time of the year. We get ignition, we get fires, and they're really big because we've got so much fuel. And so it's just.
I've read that one of the problems with controlled burns is that in order to have a controlled burn in an area, you've designated an area, we need to reduce that fire hazard here. You have to put in roads for the vehicles and for the fire breaks. And what happens when you try to put in a road in the countryside somewhere? This is bureaucratic red tape.
Yeah.
And then a lot of people will object to it because, as you know, there's another opinion side to this, which is, don't do anything to the land, let it be natural.
Yeah. Well, I have my brother lives down in Southern California and by Big Bear Lake, and it's a beautiful area, right? And they've been wanting to do some controlled burns around there. But there's also the Los Angeles County Air District or something like that.
Right.
And they're saying, no, don't do that because it'll affect our air quality.
Yeah.
Well, if you have a big fire, that's really going to affect your air quality. But,
Yeah.
so there's this matchup between jurisdictions, and some have more power than others. So what do you do? It's really, I've been in this type of business for long enough that I just sometimes you kind of bang your head because it's so crazy and some of the stuff. Like
When it comes to timelines, WILO used to be, providing drought tolerant plants. That used to be the most important thing. But now in the last 5 years, I've noticed that the fire department comes in and they just X out all the plants that are, not approved by them. And especially if it's in a WUI, they make doubly sure that it's not, fire prone. So I think that they are becoming more and more strict.
And then also layered on top of this is the water efficient landscape ordinance, which now, as of this last year or so, is kind of subordinate to this. It's been edited so that it is subordinate to it. But now when you do those water use calculations, they bump up because just for that particular reason, because you're having these plants that are more, require more moisture to survive. But there's some other things too. It's like putting pebbles down. Like there's one project I was working on, the municipality was saying, well, just scrape the earth, and then what do? Nothing can live there anymore. Or you put down or gravel or rocks, and those are they're difficult mulch, because if you don't have some type of weed barrier underneath it, then they're really hard to get weeds out of, right? So then you put the weed barrier underneath that, and what do you have? You had some plastic that's combustible. Yeah. So it's really crazy. But the biggest thing that gets me is the issue about the plants and what plants are over here. These are great plants, and over here they're not so great. Don't use them. It's very kooky. It really is, to some extent. I think it's getting better. I think that the Bay Area in general, the communities talk to one another a lot more, and then you get into more isolated communities, and they may have different information sources. So
we have some plants, near our house in some places, avocado tree, there's hydrangea, a few other things. And they get watered regularly. They look nice and full of moisture and all that kind of stuff. I guess what you know, which I don't, is that in the case of a fire, the heat will elevate those things into combustion.
Eventually.
Well, yeah, you have to look into the fire, what fire department is, what is the jurisdiction that you're,
But
Well,
you're
what I'm
not
getting
in
at
a,
is that,
you're not in a WUI zone though.
no, it's true. But what I'm getting at is that the ordinary plants that people use for decorative landscaping around their house, they, as often as not, are considered combustible materials
Well-
that will spread the fire.
yeah, the more herbaceous, like the more woody the plant is, the more fire prone it is. So if you have smaller plants or succulents, those are less fire prone. So that's,
I think that the whole idea of education is really critical of the homeowner and of the design community, so that I think the idea of setting up, maintenance practices for the homeowner, so they are, at least the designer makes them aware of practices that need to be executed so that they reduce their own fire risk. Because otherwise, if you just leave, years past, we would do a project and then step out and go on to the next one. Well, operations and maintenance is really critical. And especially in these types of environments, and owners, property managers really need to be aware of that. And have staff that's trained and is also educated in these environments, so they.
Are there
maintain
also
properly.
mechanical ways of reducing the risk? I think we did, I think the project in Larkspur, older house, but very combustible. And so we added sprinklers. And I think we added sprinklers around the eaves. So what I'm wondering is, are there things that you can do that involves fire sprinklers, particularly or sprayed at 5-foot zone, that have a positive effect?
yeah, there is one of the things the book mentioned, Firescaping book, is that to have water on site, like well water or something, that regularly makes sure that the vegetation is watered well. So that would be like having a storage tank or well water, that you can keep the vegetation moist and not have these dry situations. So that would be one of them.
So I mean, most of us probably get a thing every month or something from DevMud, telling us how much water we're using and how good we are compared to other people, but it almost seems like, for fire prevention purposes, having an irrigation system that regularly waters your yard and keeps the soil and plants moist would be good, but that would probably bump your water use into an unacceptable level.
Yeah, maybe in the summer months when it gets unusually dry, that could be something that you could do.
But I think it's kind of interesting that we are in a environment that's basically a fire climax community where, ecologically speaking, we would have over millennia fires that would change the landscape every 20 years or so. And so maybe our, our thought process needs to adapt to that kind of idea that we need to accept that that's in our environment, and that we need to build to that build to nature, rather than trying to set it aside or protect it, or you understand what I'm trying to get at? Yeah.
I do understand what you're getting at, and I think it's ironical that, after the East Bay Hills fire, which was of course very devastating, that people built the houses back that were even bigger than before, bigger volume and bigger footprint. And yet we're talking about defensible space, the vegetation and stuff. So besides forest management, I think we have to think about the density and the use of the land.
Yeah.
I mean, it has to do with private property ownership and, the value of embodied wealth, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's actually a complex problem, because not everyone's gonna have that kind of problem. Do you kind of see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Or in certain areas where people were blaming PG&E for the fire because of the winds and stuff. But you have to look at it this way. I mean, one can look at it this way also, because it costs money to underground the power lines, let's say, and then who's gonna pay for it? And also think about who's building in those kind of areas. It's usually people with more money that can live in a more rural area because they can afford more of the land. I don't know if I explained it properly.
Yeah,
But I think we have to look at the issue of fire control on a lot of levels besides like forest land management, but there's also social, economic problems due to the distribution of wealth. I mean, I'm not a communist or something, but it's so
I'm
hard.
yeah,
It's okay if you are.
I didn't want to say it like that, because we're architects and we're usually
Yeah.
communists,
Yeah.
yeah,
but it's just like, it's actually a hard problem to solve because it's a lot of different kinds of people are
Yeah,
involved.
and the other thing is that I find really frustrating, especially with trying to do material searches on Google nowadays or whatever, it's just so much crap out there,
mhm,
it's just, it's really hard finding the real deal.
yeah.
It's just because you get misled so much.
Yeah, even, because I've worked in Saratoga and right next to Saratoga, like Mountain View, which is more urban. The homeowners know that they are in a completely fire-prone area, but it's so forested and green and they have these beautiful trees in their property. The property is like 1 acre plus. And they don't actually care that they're in a fire-prone area. They're like, we'll do whatever it takes to, prevent it, but they could have easily bought a property in a less fire-prone area,
Or by this one, that one, and that one next to you, so you have.
Make it defensible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about the idea of people taking these defensible spaces into the urban areas? This is one of the things that over the years, I've struggled with is that my wife grew up in a WUI area. And so she was used to that they had to clear vegetation all. But now that we live in an urban area or a more urban suburban area, there isn't that fire risk. But still the
Well,
balance
there is,
between.
though, I mean,
There is,
Oakland, Berkeley, those hills that we pointed to, I mean, that's a high fire zone.
No, we live in Alameda,
Oh,
close to the water.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so
Well, the
it's-
fire risk in Alameda is when we have the big earthquake,
Right.
we have no water supply
Mhm.
to the island. And there's been residents there were like, we actually need to have a fire boat with a fire pump on it, so
Mhm.
they can put out any major fire, and there is none.
Mhm.
Yeah, and also because of climate change, these fires are so fast.
Right.
And the flames, the one that's happening near Sacramento,
Yeah.
the flames are like 5,000 feet high. So the
Well, because
ability to
the intensity of
spread,
the heat, and then when you get terrain with a wind flow,
yeah,
Yeah.
it just fans itself.
And they're creating it's creating its own
Vortex.
weather conditions.
yeah, this morning I read there was a fire vortex.
Well, that's a problem that they have in Southern California in the Panorama Hills. They always have fires down there, and yet the people have a lot of money, so they just simply clear their site and rebuild again, and yet it's a cycle that
Yeah.
they've accepted down there. It's almost like there's areas where there's these pockets of people that are willing to live with the risk, but really they're also causing a higher risk
Mhm.
of the upkeep and maintenance protection.
Yeah,
I think if you like the lush, overgrown feel of nature, in the context of your own residence, as I do. We have 2 70-foot redwood trees and money trees and stuff like that, but you should live in flatlands, because I think what you guys are saying about slopes is really key. To the spread of fire. I mean, the flatlands, you can have all these trees and stuff like that, but it's also an awful lot of material that is just not timber friendly. Asphalt roads and roofs and stuff like that.
there was a New York Times article a few months ago. And it had an infographic with a sliding bar.
Mhm.
And it had number of people dying per year through wildfires. And it was
Yeah.
like for right now is like 25 or something. You go every 10 years, it goes up to 500, like 2050. So because of climate change, the risk of fire and the risk of going out into the forested areas becomes much higher.
Electricity is also a factor, though. I mean, in most places around Oakland, much of California, if there's no electricity, there's no water pressure.
There's no what?
Water pressure because they require pumps
No.
rather than tanks.
Yeah, you go out in the countryside, it's way up in the air, big tanks or something, but around here, it's in a reservoir and it's pumped.
Well, thank you very much. Any other?
One thing to say, so years ago, I attended a presentation in Sonoma, so this was after the fire in 2017. And there were Native American speakers, and we went out onto different people's, houses where they had a couple acres, not a huge amount of property. And the Native Americans were talking about the cultural burns. It was so interesting, and that there is a pepperwood preserve, so it's called the Pepperwood Preserve near Santa Rosa. And they have like online educational information that you can look at. It's more interesting than you would think. So, because I think it takes into account more than one perspective. So it's the Pepperwood Preserve in Sonoma, or sorry, in Santa Rosa.
Just one more thing,
Sonoma.
these meetings when we do the Zoom, they're recorded, so I need to dial back to the detail on this. You can just work with Sydney and the link.
Yeah, that's true. I needed to, sorry about that, dial back.
Are you gonna send out the slides too? Because some of this isn't.
I would love to see the
Yeah.
slides, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have any.
Someone on Zoom is raising their hand. So. I don't know if Zoom can hear me, but George, if you wanna unmute yourself and speak to the room, you can.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Wait, one second, sorry, the room can't hear you.
Okay. How about now?
Okay, try now.
Okay. I put something in the chat about something I encountered recently in a job in the WUI district in Berkeley. Apparently the national WUI code exempts garage doors from the fire resistive requirement for all other exterior doors. But California removes that exemption in their WUI code. So garage doors are actually supposed to be fire rated. However, as far as I can determine, cities in the Bay Area are not enforcing that requirement, and contractors know nothing about it. And I noticed in the diagram at the beginning of your presentation, or near the beginning, that the garage door was labeled as, I think, a low priority when it showed the structure and the parts of the building that were, high priority, low priority.
Yeah.
There it is. Yeah, the garage is labeled green, which is low priority. But by California WUI code, that is actually supposed to be fire rated, just like any exterior
Well, I don't think
door.
this, I don't think this, I think this, I'm not sure this diagram came from Cal Fire or UC extension. But it does mention that fire, it points to the garage door. I think that does have to be addressed, but obviously.
Well, I mean, it's labeled, garage is labeled green, which by the scale to the right is low priority.
Yeah, but I think
Lower
it's
it's
lower in-
lower in,
It's hardening
For
the-
example, is also gonna be fire rated.
Yeah.
That's-
Right. A lot of the garage doors are vinyl.
Making everything fireproof, right?
Yeah.
But when you look at fireproofing it, there's high priority fireproofing because the embers can, land on the roof.
Sure, I understand the roof issues, but my question was actually related to the fire resistivity requirement of the garage door. And I wondered if anybody else had encountered this because the cities don't seem to be aware of it. They're definitely not enforcing it. And contractors look at you like you're from outer space when you say, yeah, you have to get a fire rated garage door.
Are there
Hi,
fire rated?
hi, I can comment on this.
Okay,
This is Cheryl Drinkwater.
right. Uh-huh.
I'm an architect in Berkeley and have presented on home hardening issues in this area.
Hmm.
This drawing, Harden Home, is from UC's Agriculture and Natural Resources website. It's a really good website that I put a link in the chat for. And Chapter 7A, you are correct, does for new construction state that you do need a garage door that is made of non-combustible or ignition resistant material, which is typically these metal sectional doors that you see. So anybody who has an older wood door would not have to comply unless they had bought a new door and got a permit for that matter. So enforcement is one thing, doing the right thing is another thing, and budget, of course, is affected. So I just wanted to make that comment. So this is not an enforcement image. This is just saying what is the highest risk for ember intrusion.
Hmm.
And a garage door, the recommendation on this website is just to make sure you have a good seal, no matter what door it is.
Okay.
So that you have a good seal around the door. And this is true for all doors. All doors, windows need to have good seals, not have gaps, not have places for embers to figure out a way to get in. So that's all this diagram is showing in this case. But you can go on their website and see what all the code requirements are for Chapter 7A, including doors, fences. I heard fences mentioned earlier. It's 5-foot metal is a recommendation. Local jurisdictions might have a more restrictive requirement. And then the last thing I wanted to mention was when you talked about the plant list and your speaker couldn't remember my organization, which is Diablo Fire Safe Council. I put a link to that guide to plants in the chat.
Okay, well, back to the difference between fire rated and non-combustible. The garage door actually has to be fire rated.
Yeah, there's 4 ways to comply.
Okay.
So the first is non-combustible or ignition resistant material. The second would be a fire rated, a 20-minute fire door, basically like a garage, like your house garage door, 20-minute fire resistant rating, or comply like Chapter 7A for wall assemblies. You could like really beef up a custom wall, so that gives you a lot of options. And then some other like a performance construction assembly that would then get approved by the local jurisdiction. So there's 4 ways in Chapter 7A to comply for vehicle garage doors.
Oh, okay. If you go to the State Fire Marshal site, there's only one garage door that's approved.
Okay, on that, you mean on that materials listing?
Yes.
That is not a
Well,
complete list.
It's on the product listing, and it's
on the product list. That is not a complete list. I have sat in on webinars with Cal Fire. That is not a complete list. That's just a list that folks opt into.
Interesting. Okay, because
it is very interesting. Yeah, there are other ways to comply, and you have to really work with your local jurisdiction.
Really
Enforcing agency.
Oh, okay, because there's the one that's listed is made by, I think it's called Carriage Door, Carriage House Door, a company in Sacramento.
Do they show any testing?
Yes.
Yeah, so they've been willing to pay for the testing, and not everyone has. So it is not an all, inclusive list. There are other ways to comply, and you really do have to work with your local jurisdiction to find out what's acceptable or not.
Okay, how do you find out what those other alternatives are? You go and talk to the Berkeley Fire Department?
I can put another link in. It's under the link I already added on, right above Kenny's last comment. I think it was second to last comment. It says ucanr.edu/sites/fire, and it has a whole bunch of categories. And the one under preparing your home, you go to garage.
Okay.
You can see the chapter, the summary of Chapter 7A.
Okay.
This garage door is, I mean, it's sitting in front of a field of concrete, more than 5 feet away from the building. And it goes off to the sides. I mean, is this a known risk or is it just something that someone said, hey, this would be nice to do?
Yeah.
What
If
was
it's
the question
really-
about? Is it a known risk? What was the risk? Everything should be science-based that we follow.
I'm sorry, the door was, did you say that it is a known risk?
The main risk, so first of all, like anything combustible is a risk. So a wood garage door would be a risk, but it's kind of beefy. It tends to be kind of beefy. So that's why it's seen as a lower risk. But if it doesn't close properly or there are many gaps around it, then it will be a higher risk.
Thank
So
you.
the chapter 7A regarding doors has to do for new construction.
What is the name of your organization?
I am the president of Diablo Fire Safe Council, and I am an architect, and I'm a home hardening educator.
Oh, okay.
You can find everything on our website. The link is in the chat.
Okay.
I did put the guide to plants, but you can see the whole website. But I just wanted to help out there, so I'll sign off now, or I'll mute now.
Thank you. That's
Appreciate it.
important.
Yeah, thank you.
I do know, well, I don't think this is an architectural code issue, but one of the big, huge problems in Sonoma and the fires was there was no electrical power. And so people couldn't use their electric garage door opener to open their garage door. And so they got stuck inside their garages and died
Oh, my God.
because there was no power. And then if they couldn't reach up high enough, or, honestly, there are a lot of elderly people who live in Sonoma and they didn't know how to release their garage door manually, or they may not have been strong enough to lift it up if they're not spring loaded. So the garage door, I mean, it's like I said, it's not like technically a code issue, probably. Parts of it are, right? But parts of it aren't. So
Be a life safety
it's
issue.
that is a that's an evacuation issue. Sorry, I'm gonna be trying to keep myself
I need
quiet
the
here.
clarification.
Yeah, but it did happen. There were definitely people got stuck in their garages. And not that somebody could release that by themselves, but the code changed after that for garage door companies have to have a battery backup now. That has changed. So all sectional automatic door openers have to have a battery backup. And obviously there's the manual release, but you're right, an elderly person may not be able to perform that action. And this gets into evacuation, which has to do with being prepared if there's fire weather or red flag day or high winds. We should all learn to be aware, sign up for alerts, have knowledge of what's happening around you so that you can move your car out ahead of time and be ready to go or evacuate early. And then I think the other problem with houses in Sonoma is if someone went into their garage and their swinging door, if they just inherently closed their door behind them and it happened to be locked, they're locked in their garage. Oh yeah, that's
With their electric car and a beautiful lithium-ion battery.
because if you lock your door between, let's say, your kitchen or whatever, your laundry room and then the door just swings closed and you're locked in your garage and you can't get the garage door up and you can't get out of the swing door.
Yeah, that code has definitely changed.
Yeah, yeah.
Any other comments, contributions?
Well, quick question, earlier on you touched on decking for a minute, so now and you also mentioned the petroleum-based products, so we can't always avoid decking completely, especially on some of these sites, so what is the preferred path forward at this point in time, or the recommended?
I think Woodside Fire Department said they have even the decking, there are Trex and TimberTech. Those are fire, they're not considered combustible, but
Yeah, they'll melt, I think.
they'll just melt. They're not good when a fire happens, but they have a fire rating. I saw TimberTech and Trex in that list of fire safe products.
Was
So,
on there, because I had a landscape architect tell me that it's actually that firefighters will not step on a Trex deck to preserve your house because it can collapse underneath them, whereas wood, they can tell if it's still stable,
That's not
whereas
true, because
with
there's
these
no
products-
structural integrity.
Yeah.
in tracks or those materials.
We had some decking in the WUI zone project we did in Larkspur, and we could not use regular redwood decking, although some municipalities consider that reasonably timber resistant. But there were two things that we could use. One, you can get fire retardant treated
Paint.
redwood,
Yeah,
which is not cheap. And the other one you can do, I believe, is e-paint,
EP, yeah,
Which
it's
is
very
also-
dense.
which is a very nice material.
Yeah.
It's very strong, doesn't splinter.
And but it's not sustainable unless it's FSC certified.
And even then, I really question a lot of international certifications
Oh, yeah,
because they can be bought.
yeah, that's right. You're right about that. I forgot that detail. eBay doesn't be certified, and a lot of stuff that comes, from the overseas, places.
How do we get the links that are up in the chat if we're here in person?
I took them down from chat and I'll be emailing everyone who registered for the event. If you didn't register, you can reach out to me and I can send them to you directly.
Okay.
Oh, nice. That was.
Any
that's a nice
other,
discussion.
yeah, any other comments?
That's a pretty hot presentation, Peter.
Well, I was thinking about bringing ice cream in and thinking that it may attract more of the remote viewers into the room
Yeah.
somehow at a later event, but
Yeah. Like
it's
fine
too warm outside, so I could.
marshmallows or.
Marshmallows, yeah, well, that was pretty sick, actually.
You'd have to up your game a little bit to show up for marshmallows.
Post them over the wildfire.
Thanks, everybody.
Fireside chat.